Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Happy Mother's Day, and let's call this holiday probably one of the most confused and confusing days of the year for many, many people who have experienced narcissistic abuse, especially with a narcissistic or otherwise very difficult mother. I often cringe when I see the calendar on Mother's Day because I know how painful this can be for so many people. There's something about that maternal relationship, and to have a narcissistic mother and the invalidation around that can really bring a lot of grief onto this day. And I hate to sort of be a Mother's Day downer, but I do recognize that this day is so complicated for so many survivors of narcissistic abuse. And I really want to validate that and acknowledge it because I think many times people feel shame, guilt, and grief when they encounter one of these kinds of commemorative holidays like Mother's Day or even Father's Day or any of these days, or any other kind of anniversary date, and are reminded of a maternal relationship. Your mother may still be living, and you're thinking, here we go, every single year, I have to sort of jump through these hurdles. Or in the case where it feels like your mother, in other cases where you feel like you have to see them because there's pressure from the family, or in the case if your mother has passed, that there's all kinds of grief that accompany this day every single year. I mean, there is really no underestimating the importance of the maternal relationship. And one thing that makes it harder, too, is sort of how it's portrayed. Let's face it, the hardest damn part of this holiday is all these people out there posting stuff on social media and talking on it. My mother, my hero, my mother saved my life, my mother, my best friend. And every time I read one of those articles, I do cringe because I do know how hard this is on survivors who didn't have that. And there's almost a normative societal expectation that everybody has this big, unconditionally loving heart of a mother that they can get lost in. And that's just not something that everyone has had. If you had a narcissistic mother, you know damn well that those shockwaves stayed with you well into adulthood. A life spent wondering, why am I not enough? Why doesn't she notice me? Why doesn't she care? Those echoes and those ghosts haunt you in adult relationships, leave many people looking to other adults in their world for guidance, and sometimes really making bad relational choices because they're trying to fill in for something that should have been given to them all along. And let's not underestimate the manipulation of the narcissistic mother. This is one of those holidays where a lot of narcissistic moms will often double down and really say, I gave up so much for you, I did so much for you, and that kind of talk. And you'll say, yeah, and that's all good. Well, I didn't sign up for this. Like that one was on you. But to have heard that as an adult, you might be able to be circumspect. To hear it as a child, it can really, really echo for you. And I have to say, on this day, Mother's Day, for a lot of people looking around at everything they're seeing, those things do echo through their head, and they're saying, I'm hearing those words as though she was saying them to me as a child yesterday. We have expectations for mothers, and I have to say, in many ways, they're different than the expectations we have for fathers. We expect mothers to get it right. So if you had a narcissistic mom and your mom didn't get it right, it can be incredibly, incredibly painful, and the grief can be never ending. What can make today even harder is if you're expected to see mom and it's not something you necessarily want to do. This is a day that's fraught, and especially as we're coming out of the pandemic in certain parts of the world, I know that there may be more pressure, especially if that wasn't celebrated last year. And that some siblings are saying, oh, come on now, and you'll get the usual guilt. You don't know that this is going to be the last year, and it's the pandemic, and we all lived, and blah, 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 and a million and one rationalizations. If you find yourself in the situation where you have to roll up to a mom who really was invalidating and difficult and really made your childhood into sort of a confusing trauma bonded mess, and you're doing it in the stead of wanting to be there for a sister you're actually fond of, or another sibling you're fond of, or some other family member, or just because, always remember to carry those wisdoms of going deep. Don't defend, don't explain, don't engage, don't personalize. Stick to your gray rock. Stick to very simple conversations. Don't put your stuff out there to be chopped up. But the fact is, moms go for it. I was actually recently watching a film where it was an incredibly toxic mother who was really going at her adult children. She was very abusive and cruel to them as kids as well. And any chance she had, she was putting a dig in. And I was watching the movie and I was thinking to myself, okay, mom has a lot of narcissistic features, and she just was unrelenting. And it was interesting to watch how they played it out in the film, because the mom kept going in there and insulting what they were doing for a living, and they didn't respond. Like, they really gray rocked her nicely and just left her and walked out of the room. And you may need to do some of that. If it's something you can avoid, especially if you think it's not going to be good for your mental health, see what you can do. As you know, sometimes forcing yourself into the obligations of days like Mother's Day, it can often put a real pall on the day. But if you do have to go, build something on the back end for you, whether it's a walk in a park or a take a nap, or do something that lifts your spirits. Do something that lifts your spirits, because it can be very painful on Mother's Day, because it's such a primal relationship to feel like you have to do something as insincere as show up with a bunch of flowers and pay homage to somebody who actually really, really did hurt you. I mean, it's tough. Motherhood's an incredibly complicated space. Many of us have mothers, some of us are mothers, and it brings up probably some of the most complicated conversations we can ever have with ourselves, and also some of the most profound impacts. So on this Mother's Day, if you're having to walk through the very uncomfortable territory of having had a very toxic, difficult mother, please be kind to yourself this year. A really important thing that survivors of narcissistic abuse can do is sometimes when you can close your eyes and really channel that child you were, that child that was ignored, the child that was invalidated, the child that was mocked or minimized. Not just on Mother's Day, but every day. If you're not going to be good to you, if you're going to keep engaging in the negative self-talk about you, please talk to that child that you once were differently. Sit with a picture and look at that picture of yourself as a child and imagine saying those things to such a little person. It's actually quite awful. One of the most important ways we can learn to talk to ourselves differently is pull out a picture of ourselves as a child, and think about using those words against our child self and say, yeah, no, that's not cool. That was actually a really sweet kid. When we can learn to talk to that part of ourselves that needed to hear that then, can also be a way to elevate ourselves. And so maybe those are the kinds of things to sort of take away on Mother's Day, that sometimes you have to go back and do this work again for yourself, but reach out to that child version of you, celebrate them, and maybe that's the best kind of commemoration you can have on Mother's Day. So to all of you out there who are watching this, who are mothers, happy Mother's Day. And if this is a hard day for you, please be kind to yourself. Give yourself some space, please, and celebrate it in a way that feels authentic and meaningful to you. And if you can't do that, make sure you build in some time to be kind to yourself afterwards. Thanks again, and happy Mother's Day.